episode of Data Gurus. I'm joined today by Matt Britton, who is the CEO and founder of Suzy. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. I was just commenting, it's hard to do this on a Monday when you have a long list of things that you want to try to get done. So I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So listen, before we get started and dive into Suzy and all the cool stuff you guys are working on, I'd love just to give people a bit of background, how you got to this point. I know when I was talking to some of the people, you had old friends at the event at your Suzy event not too long ago, and they were telling me, "Oh, I knew Matt back when, and I knew Matt back when." So you have definitely a very interesting background. I'd love for you to share that with folks.
Sure. Well, the beginnings of my career is really about helping big brands target college students and young adults. I was a nightclub promoter during college in Boston, and then shortly thereafter started an agency called the Magma Group, which is really at the beginning of the dot-com bubble, and it first serviced local businesses in the Boston area, helping them essentially get their logo and their brand and their coupons out in front of college students. I did even like a back to school welcome bag where I had a bag and all the local venues can put in their collateral, and then I would hand it out to tens of thousands of freshmen throughout the Boston area. And then from there, start to target a lot of the early dot-com companies like eBay and Lycos and Yahoo, to give them a presence on college campuses. Ended up building a great business, but found out the hard way that all receivables weren't reliable, because a lot of my clients were kind of dot-com companies that had their funding pulled for them when the bubble burst. And I got my first lesson in the school of hard knocks, so to speak. Sold the company, but it was really just about them assuming a lot of our debt. And I moved to New York and worked for a company for a couple of years before I started an agency called Mr. Youth in 2002, which would be a company I would then go on run for about 14 years, renamed it MRY. It became one of the first social media marketing companies, built it to about 500 employees, and it was acquired by the Publicis Group in 2014.
That's fantastic.
So that was sort of my background. And before the agency was sold, I incubated software within the agency called CrowdTap, and I spun it out. So that didn't go along with the acquisition, and CrowdTap would one day actually become Suzy in 2017. So the origins of Suzy actually date all the way back to an agency I founded now about 22 years ago.
That's amazing. And CrowdTap, is my understanding is that a community of people that take surveys?
It is now. When we invented CrowdTap, it was a B2B and B2C brand. It was an influencer platform. When we made the pivot to Suzy, we kept the CrowdTap brand as our consumer product. And still exists today. That's where essentially our panel lives. And then it's on top of that CrowdTap panel is Suzy, which is our enterprise marketing software, market research software.
Got it. And what year did you found Suzy?
So Suzy was spun out and launched in 2017.
Okay. All right. So you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
And it feels as if you've been taking the market by storm. I mean, I hear so much about, what you guys are doing. Obviously there's competitors in the same space, but Suzy continuously takes up a lot of mind share. So give me a little bit of an idea of, what is the pain point that Suzy serves in the MR community?
Well, it's interesting because I didn't come from the market research industry, but I did work with CMOs and brand managers and business decision makers for 15 years while I was running my agency. And I think that was both a blessing and a curse, and still is today. It's a blessing in that I was able to kind of see through all the market research jargon and really understand the problem that needed to be solved, which is businesses were not making decisions based upon the input of consumers. They were making it myopically from the boardrooms versus listening to what the consumers were saying in the sidewalks. It was a curse in that when we launched Suzy, which is a market research tool, I wasn't really knowledgeable about all of the market research functionality and terminology.
Right.
Of that game. So while we started off as a quick and easy tool, we quickly got exposed from some of the more sophisticated true market researchers who were asking us about some of this more sophisticated methodology, which I didn't even know what it was. But what we were fortunate enough to be able to do is bring on a lot of people from the market research establishment, from the big legacy companies like Nielsen and Kantar and Ipsos and Mintel and all those great companies. We were able to recruit seasoned people from those companies to come on and sort of like fill in our weakness, so to speak. And I think coming out of that was a really great mix of folks like myself and our president, Avi Savar, who come from the advertising world, who know how to storytell, who know how, who know about data visualization, who know about branding and marketing, the end consumer. And we mix that with a lot of people who really understand the practice and discipline of market research. And I think those two things combined is really the secret to our success and ultimately what makes us different.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you anticipate Suzy being brought to the test of kind of the research function within brand organizations, or was your hypothesis that you could go directly to brands, brand managers, marketing managers, and they could leverage the platform, do their own research, if you will, not maybe as sophisticated, but
democratize research.
Exactly.
It was really better because I didn't even know the former existed. So my whole world in building an agency was about the marketing and the brand manager world. So I was, a problem for them to solve. As it turned out, since we are a market research and consumer insights tool, that function is largely controlled by, the consumer insights function at organizations. And it quickly became evident that in order for us to scale, we needed to speak to the needs of the researchers within the organization, not the brand managers. And that made that shift to kind of broaden out our talent base to people who spent their careers within those roles.
Makes a lot of sense. And now, as you've democratized research, right, you've obviously won the hearts and minds of traditional consumer insights professionals and researchers. Are you seeing the expansion and use of the platform to the original target that you had planned, brand managers and marketing managers?
Right. The way I look at that expansion is more around use cases, right?
Okay.
So pillars of where research is used, you have it used in early stages of innovation and research and development. Then once a product gets live, you're looking at the testing of ads and copy and creative and things like that. And ultimately, once the product gets in or service gets in consumers' hands, it's about consumer experience or CX, right?
Yeah.
The experience of it. When we look at, and then of course, across all four of those functions, you have both qual and quant and various different types of functionality and actions that can unlock insights from consumers. So our expansion is really about, we look at the total addressable market of research, both in the US and globally, and how can we build our feature set within Suzy as a platform that can address the needs across that continuum, regardless of who the buyer is. So we're really focused on providing a solution to the problem. I think the reason that a problem still exists is that market research largely is still being done by services and agencies. And the issue with that is that there's a lack of technology, a lack of data. And then what happens for the buyer is that they don't gain the efficiencies of that. And they're spending too much time and too much money uncovering research that could be done a lot more efficiently. So when I look at the future growth area of Suzy, it's really to disintermediate the traditional market research agency and contemporize this industry, which is far behind, say, the advertising industry and other industries in terms of embracing digital transformation.
Now, I hear what you're saying. I guess the question I have is, there's a time and purpose for different stakeholders on the value chain, right? And so are you saying that Suzy is basically share shifting some of that research from traditional agencies to your platform and others like yours to get to the answers faster? Or are you suggesting that the market's just growing? The TAM is growing.
The TAM is not growing.
Okay.
Search is largely flat, especially in recent years with economic slowdowns we've seen. If you look at Qualtrics, which is say $1 billion in revenue, to a nice numbers is an $80 billion TAM. That means the largest software player is 1/80th of the market, right? The largest software player in advertising, well, it's Google and Facebook. They're 60 to 70% of the market as a duopoly. So we have so far to go as an industry to embrace technology. And I would argue digital transformation is much more appropriate in market research, or at least as much as it was in even advertising. Because of linear models like TV that for some brands still make a lot of sense. So I think that this industry has been slow to adopt change. The early entrants into the space, SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics, they grew because they had first mover advantage. They were the first online market research tools. So for them, the big idea was online market research. When in 2017, 2018, the enterprise was finally ready to adopt digital technologies as a tried and true form to conduct research. But we are still in the very early innings of that transformation happening. So I do not think that our growth is going to come from the industry growing, although an argument can be made that the consumer insights function is going to become more powerful over time with the growth of AI and the growth of data driving decisions.
Sure.
Instead, our growth is going to come from us disintermediating the service layer to allow our customer to become more efficient and, to your point, ultimately get to insights and business decisions faster, which is really imperative right now.
And I mean, you said the industry's slow moving. What do you think the biggest impediment is to embrace this change? What do you see?
It's just legacy thinking. Just like, I mean, if you look at financial services, if you look at real estate, if you look at healthcare, there's a lot of industries where it's like, when you go to your doctor's office, why do you still have to fill out a physical form in a lot of places? Why
annoying.
Well, it's because there's a sort of industrial complex in and in other industries where the decision makers ultimately profit from things not changing, right?
Right.
And I think ultimately, whether it's these legacy, companies and providers in the industry that don't have technology, that don't have management that understands where things are heading, pushing the clients and they're trying to clients to be held back, or frankly, it's a lot of client decision makers who are scared of change and who don't adopt it and still want to hold on to the way things were done. And this is not the first industry and the first time we've seen this throughout history, but ultimately these businesses are going to be pressured to adopt at what we call the speed of culture, and they're going to have to move quickly. And when they do so, they're going to have to seek out solutions that kind of can meet their changing needs. And that's where we think Suzy fits in very well.
Matt, do you think that the next generation of leaders are primed for this transformation? Are you seeing that transition between leadership, and it's like a no-brainer because the next generation kind of grew up digitally for the most part?
Yeah. So the millennial generation, which has been spoke about ad nauseum, is the first to grow up with the internet in the household, right? The prior, which is generation I'm part of, Gen X, did not. So you have a lot of C-level decision makers at Fortune 500 companies that are Gen Xers, but slowly being phased out in favor of millennials. And when millennials come into the C-suite, and not soon thereafter, Gen Z, Gen Z was the first generation to grow up with the mobile device in the household.
Right.
Generation growing up with AI in the household, right? Yeah. These generations are not going to stand for these legacy ways of things being done. And they're going to come in and expect that the solutions that they procure are going to be able to deliver things fast and be data-driven, iterative. So I do think with the passage of time, as these millennials enter decision-making roles at companies, it's going to really fall very much in the favor of us and companies like us.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I know, even generationally, you can see that there's generations who don't even want to talk face to face, right? It's all done digitally, text, WhatsApp, whatever. And
think about surveys. Like, you show me a Gen Z, boy or girl who grew up with the phone as an appendage to their body that wants to fill out a 55 questions.
I know.
None of them do.
None of them do.
How many studies are conducted that way?
Yeah, that's very true.
This is a generation that grew up flicking on their phone at kind of an average of 6 seconds. You're telling me they talk about the same brand for 27 minutes? No way. So, and that's just one side of the equation. How about the buyer? Does the buyer really want to pour through a 70-page research report?
Right.
No. Want charts and graphs and visuals that can allow them to really understand what the story is so they can retell it to drive the business. So on all sides of this, there's so much room for, again, this to be evolved. And I don't think it has to be done at the behest of the core fundamentals of what research is. You still need great quality, you still need great models and methodology and statistics, but at the same time, it needs to be done in a way that fits better with how businesses need to move.
Yeah, I've said this before. I also think the type of people who conduct research the requirement will be even greater to be able to link research to business objectives and business decisions versus kind of collating research. It's really making the impact and driving decisions from the research, which I know we try to do now, but we're at the tip of the iceberg. I still think.
I won't name names. I've talked to many CMOs because that's where I have relationships from my career. We say that there have been long periods of time where the brand managers who essentially own the brands and the P&Ls at large CPG and food and beverage companies and other industries,
Yes.
like try to avoid and usurp research groups because they put them down.
Yeah.
And they don't really, and often the research that they get from these groups is dated and it makes much sense. So I think, if that doesn't tell you that this industry is in drastic need of change, I don't know what is. At the same time, insights professionals can really be empowered if they can storytell, if they can command the data to really be much more visible and powerful leaders at organizations, but they need the tools to empower them to do so.
I agree. In those conversations that you had with CMOs, what do they do in terms of data if they don't get it from the consumer insights or research department? I mean, these are major decisions they're making.
Oh, and a lot of times those decisions are made by the HIPPO, which is the highest paid person's opinion, and there is no data.
Yeah, I know.
So I was working with a major apparel company who made a $15 million endorsement deal with a celebrity with zero data. Their daughter told them about it while they were driving them to school, the CMO, and they're like, oh, let's just do that. Because in the absence of having data, you're just going to make it
go with your gut.
That one, you're going to go with your gut. Exactly.
Yeah. And you're willing to take the risk and the fallout for that decision.
These huge controversies when companies roll out content or TV commercials where they cancel. It's like, well, how could they do that? It's like, well, they didn't have any data to back it up. So they just typically, they got in their echo chamber, they made that decision. And the consumers, we see it happen all the time still.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, let's talk about AI. You've obviously focused, you guys have spent a lot of time thinking about AI and its role into your business and in the industry. Just give me your kind of high level perspective on how AI will impact our industry.
Oh, I mean, it's going to impact our industry just as much as the internet itself did or the mobile device did.
Agreed.
Ultimately, when it comes to the speed and power of processing data and inputs to output kind of core summaries, which could drive decisions, that middle layer of when you collect research and then basically you're taking that research and analyzing it and it's spitting out summaries, conclusions, directions. That's where AI is going to really become a core disruptor. Really, it's going to put a lot more power with companies who have proprietary data sources.
Yes.
Because essentially the use of AI is going to be ubiquitous. Anybody can use ChatGPT right now, right? Anybody can use the myriad of tools that allow you to better analyze data or pump out visualizations. But if you can actually get on the input a proprietary data source and get it with some type of efficiency, well, that's how you're going to differentiate yourselves. And then the use of these AI tools are going to make you more powerful and more differentiated.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the data is such a critical component. I also think, privacy, obviously with ChatGPT, is critical, and being responsible and ethical about what you put in there. There's a lot of learning and education around that.
Because I remember when e-commerce first came onto the scene, everyone's like, there's no way I'm going to put my credit card or with Amazon or an e-commerce company because everyone's going to steal it. And you know what? Yeah. Consumers got over it, and now they're putting their social security numbers and all sorts of things. They're
forms.
Stations with other people over messaging. I think that there's going to be the firewalls put up by these platforms where and you don't have to worry that your data is going to be shared with other companies. And I think that that's a very much a AI 1.0 concern, and not going to be because it's solvable with technology.
It is. I mean, I think, I agree with you totally. Let's talk about synthetic sample. I know it's something that you talked about, and it felt like when you were speaking about it, you were waiting for demand signals from clients to say, yes, I'm ready to explore synthetic sample. What's your view on, the role of synthetic sample playing into the future?
I think we're a long way away from business decision makers relying on the input of synthetic sample to drive core business decisions. I just think that, there's not a lot of intuition with synthetic sample. A lot of it is an echo chamber of everything else that's out there. And research is forward looking in terms of where things are going, not where things are. So if you think about the world we live in today, it's a scary world. There's a lot of macroeconomic strife going on. There's there's things happening socially, which consumers are experiencing and their children are experiencing, which shape their worldview and shape how they look at businesses and brands. Synthetic sample can't capture that because it's not living in the world. That being said, will there be use for synthetic sample? Definitely. Like, we look at the ability to test how questions and surveys are written to eliminate bias. And if you can test that example, that's a good example of a way to use that to make researchers more efficient in the way to conduct research, and a multitude of other ways that it can be used, which I'm not going to get into detail on because we're building.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of benefit, but I don't think the benefit anytime soon is going to be it can replace human sample. It's not going to give you qual either. It's not going to really help you dig into the why behind the what. There's a lot of reasons why. 5 years from now, who knows? But reality is, think about it. If researchers can trust synthetic sample, that means humans can trust synthetic doctors or synthetic psychologists or synthetic teachers. Get to that point, we're going to be in a completely new world where the input of any professional arguably would also be questioned. So it's a bigger existential question that goes far beyond research.
Totally agree. It's a universal societal question, and I don't really know if anybody knows that answer yet. I think we're just continuing to see how things evolve.
Yeah, I think for us, and as a CEO, like, I'm trying to make sure that we are on the cutting edge, but that can also go beyond if you get to the bleeding edge where you're pushing out that, because we work with Fortune 500 companies, like there's obviously a very risk averse approach to AI right now, and for good reason. We don't want them to dive off the edge of the cliff just so they can do something that's edgy. So we need to innovate and be a leader in our space. So that's sort of a delicate balance that we play as a later stage startup to try to push our clients, but not push them too far back to the establishment, so to speak.
Yep. It's a fine balance. You to your point, you don't want to be on the bleeding edge, but you also don't want to not be perceived as innovating and keeping up with the current trends.
That's right.
So what does the future of Suzy look like? You guys have been doing this for a while. A question for you, are you mainly focused in the US, or do you work globally?
So the majority of our employees in the US, the majority of our clients based in the US, we do have international expansion plans for 2024.
Okay.
It's the first time I'm saying that publicly. We're very intentional. First of all, 60% plus of the addressable market research is in the US. So relatively small as a percentage of that entire market that someone to run here. That being said, as we go further upstream, a lot of our customers do want us to have a global presence, and our product is global, but we don't have a physical presence globally, meaning we can address global sample, but we don't have individuals, but that's going to change next year. So global is obviously a big part of our expansion. Becoming more of a platform and an ecosystem is a big part of their expansion. So if you look at the growth of most SaaS and software companies, they ultimately become ecosystems, not walled gardens, where they speak to other platforms, whether it's on the input of data or on the output of data and reports. We want Suzy to be part of the pipes of these organizations and allow Suzy to talk to other platforms that these companies have across CRM, across digital, across finance even. So that's a big part of our product development roadmap. We also just have an incredible roster of clients that are still getting comfortable with shifting more and more of the research to a company called Suzy, which 3 years ago, we've been around for 5 years, which in some ways seems like a long time, but in other ways is really just, we're the youngest company of any of our competitors at our stage in research. Appy or Taluna, those companies are around far longer than us. And or Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey. So we're still building our brand, and brand matters so much in research that we really want to keep adding value, becoming a voice of innovation in the industry. And over time, as more and more of these brands trust Suzy and our product continues to deliver, we're just going to grow through the war of attrition by continuing to be there and continuing to be a trusted partner. That
sounds exciting. Speaking brand is so important. Just give us a little background on the name Suzy.
Oh, well. So my favorite band of all time is a band called Fish.
Okay. Yep.
We knew we had to kind of pivot CrowdTap, which, as I mentioned earlier, was a software company I'd spun out of my agency, because CrowdTap had been an influencer platform and it had too much knowledge in the industry as an influencer platform. So we had to kind of rebrand it because it was typecast. So we ended up keeping CrowdTap as a consumer brand, but we had to come up with a new brand for the B2B world. And I was at one of their concerts at Madison Square Garden with a friend of mine, and they played a song called Suzy Greenberg, and a light bulb went on my head. Let's call it Suzy, because at that time, I kind of knew this AI wave was coming and that we were going to be talking to our technology. There's already Siri and Alexa and these tools.
Right.
So I said, well, if we get a name, it's differentiated in the industry. And thankfully, I went back that night and went online and saw that, if you typed in Suzy into Google, there was no other companies that came up. It was just one Korean pop star that came up.
That's awesome.
It's ownable from a business perspective, and we're able to the URL, and now that's just what we are, and it makes sense that what we are that. So ultimately, it just shows that it doesn't matter what the name is; it just has to be easily remembered and truly ownable, and then you can build the brand behind it, and that's what we've been able to do.
I love that story. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today. Truly enjoyed speaking with you, and let's continue to keep in touch.
I can't wait to hear the pod. Talk soon.
All right, thank you.